G'day poker people, welcome back to my never-ending journey to dig myself out of this hole. Like a masochist, I've returned to the same game where I lost $37,000 over the course of 17 days. Will things be different this time? Have I learned my lesson at all? Why am I yelling right now? Stay tuned to the end of this video where I'll answer at least most of these questions. Today's game is 2-5-10. We're starting out 5-handed with both the $100 per person 7 deuce bounty on, as well as a $25 per hand small blind bounty game on, which definitely makes for a more action-packed game. So let's not waste any more time and get to gambling. Let's go.
Hey YouTube.
So first things first, I'm the realist and we've got $50 on the small blind bounty. Then the cutoff goes ahead and raises it up to 30. Then I'm on the button and I look down at pocket queens. Definitely the type of hand I wanted to look down at first thing in the session. I go ahead and 3-bet it up to 100. Then a loose aggressive small blind rips it all in for 1,300. Definitely think they're doing this with a bit of a wider range considering there's a small blind bounty on. The cutoff ends up folding and I think we have a pretty easy snap call here with the queens. That's what I do. The opponent shows ace-9 of hearts, so we're in great shape. We decide to run it once and the flop, we flop a full house. Let's go 4-4-4. The opponent is only drawing to their ace and then it's a clean run out and we end up scooping this pot. We actually make a better full house on the river. Doesn't matter though, didn't need it. What a way to start the session. Already stacking people. Next up, there's 75 on the small blind bounty and the cutoff goes ahead and open limps. And then the big blind raises it up to 50. Then I'm in the straddle with the best hand in all of poker. Let's go, yet another premium, pocket aces. I 3-bet it up to 160. The cutoff folds and then the big blind thinks for a few seconds before throwing in that call. So it heads up to a flop of queen 6-4 with 2 spades when the opponent checks it over to me. Definitely want to go ahead and bet for value here. There's always going to be merit to trapping with aces, but I think with so many likely spade draws out there and weaker pocket pairs that will likely be scared off on certain turns, I think it's a good spot to go ahead and start building a pot. I bet 110 and then they call. So we get to see the turn, which is the 4 of diamonds. Good turn for us. It's less likely that the opponent does have a set, although they are going to have a few ace-4 suited, maybe like 5-4 suited hands in their range. We do block them pretty heavily, having pocket aces ourselves. So absolutely no reason to stop betting at this point. I go ahead and make it 300, and then the opponent calls. So we're off to a river, which is the jack of hearts. Very big brick river. Very happy to see that spades can get in. So when the opponent checks it over to me, with the SPR of less than 1, I think it's pretty much nothing else to do here but go all in. I think the chances we're behind are very, very unlikely, given that the repeat 4 blocks the set of 4s, and if they have quads, like, power to you. I think it's much more likely they do have king queen or ace queen, so I decide to go ahead with it. I rip it all in, and then the opponent is in the blender, they're in the tank, and they start tanking for probably like 2 or 3 minutes, and they start saying, I put you on aces or ace queen, that's it, that's all you can have. And then after deliberating, they're sort of moving chips back and forward, shuffling their cards, they end up sliding those chips in and announcing a call, and then I say, yep, you're right. I show my pocket aces, and then they're like, yes, I knew it. And they start high-fiving people at the table, and then they show king queen. So yeah, I don't think I've ever had a worse hand call, and then they started celebrating at the table. It was definitely pretty funny. Trying not to laugh too much and be an obnoxious winner, but I'm a winner for this one. We sacked someone for the second time this session. Let's go. Let's see if we can go for a hat trick here. There is 125 on the small blind bounty and the cutoff opens it to 30. And the action folds to my straddle with ace-jack offsuit. Could go either way between 3-betting and calling here. As long as you don't fold this hand pre-flop, I think you played it fine. I decide to 3-bet in this instance. I go ahead and make it 130, and then the cutoff throws in the call. So it heads up to a flop of king 8-3 with 2 hearts. With a king high board, it's going to be great for our range, having the strongest kings, and there's a bunch of incentive to deny equity to hands like jack 10 or, particularly 7 deuce. So I got to decide to bet 80 here, and then the opponent calls. So it still heads up to a turn, which is the queen of clubs, giving us a gut shot to Broadway. And at this point, I really want to check it over to the opponent. 2 induced bluffs. I think they're going to bluff pretty aggressively with the 7 deuce bounty on. And if we do bet here and still get action, we're value owning ourselves a little bit. So I decide to check in this instance. The opponent goes ahead and bets 225, and getting these odds, I throw in the call. So we're still heads up to a river, which is the 7 of diamonds. And yeah, not the river I wanted, because we do lose to 7 deuce now, which I think is the opponent's most likely bluffing hand. So at this point, nothing to do but check it over to the villain. Then they go ahead and bet 500. I think if they did have a missed heart draw or something, they could potentially be bluffing at it. And unblocking that with the ace-jack offsuit is pretty good. However, I just can't get out of my head that their most likely bluffing hand did get there on the river in 7 deuce, and I just don't want to pay them off if they are betting that hand as kind of a mergy type thing. So I do decide to fold the ace jack here, and then the opponent shows the 7 of hearts before mucking the other cards. So it wasn't a win of the hand, but I'll take it nonetheless. So it's a few hands later now, and the small blinds worked up to 225 on it, and the good news is the action folds to my small blinds straight away, which I'm loving, and I'm definitely going to want to be opening very aggressive here to win. Just 225 uncontested would be pretty sweet. So when I look down at 10-7 offsuit, even though maybe I shouldn't, I deem this hand good enough to raise here. I go ahead and make it 50, and then a tight aggressive straddle calls, unfortunately. So we are heads up to a flop of ace-jack 3 with 2 diamonds. The action's on me, and definitely want to go ahead and bet this ace-high board. So I go ahead and make it 35, and then the opponent throws in the call. So we're heads up to a turn, which is the ace of spades. This is a pretty good turn for us, actually. It makes it less likely the opponent flopped top pair. Being that they're defending out of the straddle versus an aggressive small blind opening range, it wouldn't shock me at all if they called with all the suited and offsuited ace-2 through ace-jack combinations. So the fact that that's less likely now on the turn really makes me want to keep bluffing. I go ahead and make it 150, going to use a larger polarized size, and then the opponent calls pretty quickly. So we're heads up to a river, which is the 3 of spades. So backdoor spades get in, but front door diamonds missed, which is actually really great for us because it means we're going to be able to fold my opponent off a lot of king high and queen high diamond combinations, and the likelihood that they have a backdoor flush is less likely because we have the 7 of spades ourselves. I decide to bluff at it. I go ahead and make it 300, and then the opponent snap calls and asks, do you have an ace? I don't say anything, but I turn over my 10 high, and then they show queen jack of clubs. So GG to the villain, they called off our bluff there. We've got 250 on the small blind bounty at this point, so it's definitely getting up there. The button goes ahead and opens it up to 40, and then the small blind calls, unsurprisingly. Then the action folds to my straddle, and we've got yet another premium, pocket kings. I can't believe we had 10-7 offsuit and pocket kings back to back, running hot this session. I go ahead and 3-bet it up to 225, and then the button calls, and the small blind folds. So we're going heads up to a flop of 544 rainbow. The action's on me, and definitely want to go ahead and c-bet this board. We have a very strong hand that wants to get value from my opponent's pocket pairs, so I go ahead and make it 200 button calls. So we stay heads up to the turn, which is the 8 of diamonds, putting in backdoor diamonds. Now, I think the best play probably would be to just continue betting here. I got a bit tricky here though. I checked, and I was basically just trying to check raise all in with my kings, trying to stack 9s plus, but I think it's a bit too tricky. I probably should just be continuing to bet to try and build a pot that way, because my opponent definitely could check back 9s or 10s potentially, or even just fold it to the check raise. So, but I made the mistake. I went ahead and checked it here, and then the villain checks back like super quickly. So we do get to see the free river, which is the 6 diamonds, pretty gross river. We lose to both pocket 7s and pocket 6s now, but I still want to go ahead and bet here just to try and eke out a bit of the value from pocket 9s or pocket 10s. So I decide to use a blocker bet. I go ahead and bet 350, which I think is a bit too big. I think maybe 250 will be like the chef's kiss perfect size bet here. I kind of cooked it though. I made it 350, and then the button calls very quickly. I show my hand and they end up showing pocket 7s. So damn, they did get there on the river, and GG to them. So the small blind bounty is getting a bit out of control now. It's up to 300, and unsurprisingly, the same villain who I stacked with pocket aces earlier, who would like to be referred to as the big cheese from now on, goes ahead and opens up the small blind to 70. Then the action's on my big blind with ace 9 of hearts, Absolute slam dunk 3-bet spot here. Not only is the small blind opening really wide because of the incentive to win the small blind bounty, but there's extra incentive for us to try and take down the pot now, because next hand we're going to have the opportunity to win $325 on the small blind bounty. So absolute slam dunk 3-bet spot here with the ace-9 suited. We'll be doing it much wider than this. I go ahead and make it 225, and then literally out loud the big cheese screams, "Oof, you Lee." So don't think they quite liked that I did that, and they probably liked this even less because the straddle was next to act, and they rip it all in for 2.5k. Given that we're getting awful pot odds here, it's actually going to be a pretty easy fold with this hand, unfortunately. I do throw it in the muck, and then the opponent was actually kind enough to show us they did have pocket jacks. Unfortunately, I missed out on my shot in the small blind bounty when it was 325. I lost that one. Someone else at the table ended up winning a really big small blind bounty, and it's back down to 100 at this point. And then a tight aggressive small blind opens it up to 75, and then big cheese in the big blind calls. Then I'm in the straddle with ace jack of clubs. I 3-bet it up to 300. Then the small blind rips it all in for 400. The big blind leans back in his chair with his cards and shows his mate, who was just like hanging out in the background, and he says, "See this? This is natural 6. So I'm like, yeah, I think he's folding here. So I throw in the call. Then the small blind shows king, queen of spades, and they ask us how many times do you want to run it. And I'm say, let's just go once here. And then he goes, "Oof." Oh, I'm like, all right then, we'll run it twice, I guess. The game was definitely had a more friendly, jovial vibe, as you can tell by some of the language used, but I was confused. Like, bro, if you want to run it twice, just say you want to run it twice. Don't ask me. Like, I don't care either way. But we end up running it twice, and we've got the live run out here. Looking to fade any kings or queens here, and you can see first card in the window is the queen of clubs, so definitely not what we want to see. But we turn 2 pair with the ace. Let's go. We end up taking down the first board with our turn 2 pair. Not a bad start. We still got to win on the second board though. Ace high board. Let's go. The opponent has spades, not clubs, so we're in great shape. We end up scooping this whole thing. The run good for the session continues. Another one. We've got 175 on the small blind bounty, and then a tight aggressive button, open limps. The small blind calls, then the actions on my big blinder with ace-10 offsuit. I raise it up to 80, and then the button rips it all in for 278. The small blind folds, and given this price, it's a pretty easy snap call here. So that's what I do, and it's against the same villain from the previous hand, so we don't even ask this time. We agree to run it twice. They end up showing 10-9 offsuit, so pretty good situation for us, and we've got the live run out for both boards. Great start on the first board. We actually flop a gut shot and no 9s in sight. Turn 7 of spades does give my opponent a gut shot to an 8 or a queen, but we faded on the river of the 7 of clubs. Let's go. We take down the first board with ace high, just looking to fade the 9, and that's a great flop for us. We flop the nut trips. So the opponent still has the outs, 7 of clubs. No good. We hold on the second board as well, and still running good this session. Let's go. So the small blind bounty is pretty out of control at this point. There's actually 400 on it, and a new player joins the table as well. So we're actually 6-handed at this point. So the action's on the cutoff, and they go ahead and open it up to 40. Then I'm on the button with ace-9 of spades. I go ahead and 3-bet it up to 125, and then the new player cold calls in the big blind, and then the cutoff folds. So it heads up to a flop of a jack-10-8 with 2 hearts. The opponent checks it over to me, and in this board, I think my opponent's going to have a lot of strong hands, so I'd be very happy to see a free turn with my open-ended straight draw. So I check it back, so it heads up to a turn, which is the 7 of hearts. Let's go. We make our straight on the turn. The opponent checks it over to me again, and this time, gonna try and get some value. I go ahead and bet 150. Then the opponent check raises me to 325. So the opponent only had about 775 at the start of the turn here, so can't really just flat with my straight here. I think I'm either going to fold or go all in. So with that assumption, we're actually getting 2-1 on a call. So we need to be good here 33% of the time to rip it all in. And I think it's interesting because I think my opponent's going to have a fairly strong range, having cold called my 3-bet. And I think they're going to have a lot of sets on this board, maybe pocket aces, but I think more likely it's going to be a 2-pair set, straight, or a mate flush, and we're dead to mate flushes, but you can see here I put it into Equilab, and against that range we're actually good 47.47% of the time here, so we're actually going to make a lot of EV by ripping it all in, which is what I decide to do. I rip it all in and the opponent doesn't snap call, which is what we love to see, but after a few seconds they do decide to throw in the call, and then I show my 9 and they show 8-7 of diamonds. So let's go, we're in great shape here, just have to fade an 8 or a 7, and the river is the ace of hearts. So let's go, we win another big pot and scoop someone for the 3rd time this session. Whoop! The small blind bounty is completely out of control at this point. It's up to $500. Unfortunately, the action folds to my small blind. Hoppa! We're going to open very, very aggressively here. So when I look down at 10 deuce offsuit, shout outs to my boy Doyle Brunson. I open this one up to 100 and then really hope the blinds fold, but the small blind throws in the call. So we're going to have to see a flop, and kind of happy we did, because the flop ends up being 10-9 deuce. Let's freaking go. After opening this complete trash hand, I do flop 2 pairs somehow. This is a blessing, and absolutely going to go ahead and bet my 2 pair for value here. It's going to look like we're bluffing very frequently, and I will be bluffing here very frequently, by the way. So definitely want to get value when I have a hand as strong as 2 pair. I go ahead and make it 150, and then the big blind throws in the call. So we're heads up to a turn, which is the 4 of spades. Same thing I said about c-betting on the flop, still true on the turn. I'm going to keep betting at it. I go ahead and make it 350. The opponent thinks for a few seconds before throwing in the call. Let's go. We get to see a river, which is the 7 of hearts. So Jack 8 did get there as a straight, and 10-7 also a possible 2 pair, I guess. Having said that though, we're not going to slow down at this point. I go ahead and bet 600. I think maybe potentially I could go a bit bigger with the bet sizing. Like maybe I would with the bluff, so probably should when I have 2 pair, right? But whatever the case, I made it 600, and then the opponent's in the tank before throwing in that call. Let's go. I show my hand and they end up mucking theirs. And not only do we win this over 2k pot, but we also scoop the $500 small blind bounty. Let's freaking go. Yet again, we've got a large amount on the small blind bounty. It's 300 this time, and then a tight aggressive button opens it up to 50. And the action folds to my small blind. Yes, I got another shot at the bounty. I look down at pocket 7s. Now, usually I would 3-bet here with so much incentive to win the small blind bounty, but there's one dynamic that makes me really just want to call in this spot. That's because the button is a tight aggressive player, so I think they have a pretty tight range, particularly when they open 5x. Typically, I'd say them open 30 before, so I think the larger sizing is indicative of them having a bit of a stronger hand. And if I do get 4-bet in this spot, probably going to have to fold my pocket 7s when we're 900 effective. So that's just basically me taking a long way to say I made the passive line and just called with my 7s here. Let me know what you would do in the comments below. Big blind called as well. So we go 3 ways to a flop of queen 6-4 with 2 spades, and I check it over to the pre-flop aggressor and they end up checking it back. So all 3 of us check and we get a free turn, which is the queen of clubs. Pretty good turn for us, makes it a lot less likely either of the opponents has a queen. So I think it's a good spot to bet here for a bit of value, bit of equity denial, particularly when, again, we're going to be bluffing very aggressively in this spot with the small blind bounty, so we need to go thinner for value as well. I go ahead and bet 80 here, then the big blind folds and the button calls. So we're heads up to a river, which is the 3 of spades, completing front door spades, and I really want to continue to bet for value here. I think my opponent's going to have a lot of ace king and ace jack combinations in their range, which might hero call given the aggressive dynamics of me being out the small blind. I decide to go for the thin value here. I go ahead and bet 200, then the button starts tanking, and he actually says out loud, oh, he's just trying to put pressure on because of the small blind bounty. Then they throw in the call. I show my pocket 7s, and then they end up mucking their hand. I don't know why I'm so blessed to keep waking up with strong hands out of the small blind, but it's definitely nice to be running good. The small blind bounty is at a much tamer 125 now. Then the button goes ahead and open limbs, as does the big cheese and the small blind. I'm in the big blind. I look down at king 2 of clubs, and usually I would actually probably raise this hand just because we are going to make a lot of EV when the button or the small blind fold a hand like ace high. But because of the bounty dynamics, I think we're just going to get called a lot here. So I decide to raise with a stronger range here that doesn't include king 2 suited. So I just decide to throw in the call. This can be a bit dicey if you do have an aggressive straddle who squeezes a lot, but they're kind of handcuffed by the fact that the small blind's very likely to limp call a lot. So I decide to call here, and fortunately the straddle does check back. So we are 4 ways to a flop of ace, king, king with 2 diamonds. So let's go. We're running fire this session. We flop trips. The action checks to me, and I decide to check it over out of position to 2 people. I think if I had a king with a stronger kicker, like king 10 offsuit, maybe I will go ahead and bet this hand. But when we have the nut low kicker, I think it's a better hand to check to induce action with. So I go ahead and check it, and then the action checks through. So we get a free turn, which gives us a full house because it's a 2 of hearts. Let's go. It pooks out backdoor hearts as well. So when the action's on me, definitely just want to start to build a pot here. I think we're going to get called by any flush draw, and we actually beat any king now, unless the button specifically limped ace king and then checks back when they flop to full house. I just think we have the absolute nuts here, except for that very rare scenario. So just want to build a pot here. I go ahead and bet 25, and then the straddle folds, the button calls, and the small blind folds. So we're heads up with the button to a river, which is the jack of clubs, putting in queen 10. So both the flush draws miss, but I think if the opponent did limp an ace x hand, which I think they're going to do a lot, by the way, we're probably going to be able to get a bet paid off here. So really think we should be using a large size, something like 90 or maybe even an overbet probably would be good. I decide to bet 50. I think I'm missing a bit of value with a bet this size. Probably I'm going to get called a lot by ace x and just want to print money with a bigger value bet. I was a bit passive though. I only bet 50, which is a bit over half pot, and then the opponent calls pretty quickly. I end up showing my full house and they throw their hand in the muck. So even though I did win this hand, I am disappointed that I didn't use larger bet size on the river, just because I think I'm missing a good spot to just eke out a bit of thin value there. With that out of the way, 75 on the small blind bounty, small blind open limps, big blind open limps, big blind being the big cheese in this hand. Then I'm in the straddle with queen jack of clubs, I raise it up to 80, and then the small blind folds, but the big cheese calls in the big blind. So it heads up to a flop of a jack 10-9 rainbow, and now the big cheese actually decides to lead here. They go ahead and make it 80, and I think with top pair, open-ended straight draw, nothing to do but call here. I don't think there's that much merit to trying to deny equity, since we're going to get there on a lot of turns, and we could value own ourselves potentially because my opponent's going to have a lot of straights or 2 pair plus. So I just call here, then we get to see that turn, which is the queen of spades. A pretty interesting turn. It does give us top 2. We did suck out on any 2 pair, but obviously lose to any 9 or any king now, which is definitely notable because the big blind continues to lead. They go ahead and make it 150. So the action's on me, and I mean, I'll state the obvious, absolutely not folding in this spot. The thought does go through my head to potentially raise as a bluff to try and represent ace king, since we're going to have all the ace king combos and the villain's going to have none of them. Having said that though, I think that's a bit dicey with 2 pairs specifically. Like, we could already be ahead, and if the opponent does decide to hero call with a set or an 8, we're just like why are we using this hand? I would rather use like ace jack. So I decide to throw in the call, being that it's the only option left on the table for me. We get to see a river, which is the 6 of clubs, so pretty much nothing changed with the board texture on that river, and the big blind keeps betting at it. They go ahead and make it 225, so pretty gross spot. Really concerned the opponent does have a king or an 8. We lose to a lot here, so I just think that for the opponent to go bet, particularly when we're going to have a lot of 8s and a lot of kings in our range, I think I would rather call with one of those rather than, you know, just station off with 2 pair here. So even though we're getting a pretty good price on a call, I needed it up a bit and I actually decided to muck my hand, and then the villain was actually kind enough to show us that they did have 10-8, so let's go. They did turn the straight and we got away from it with minimal damage in my opinion. Although I do wonder if they would have folded to a raise on the turn or the river. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Next hand, it's a measly $50 on the small blind bounty. But to make things a bit better, we do have a double straddle on, so it's a good bit of 2, 5, 10, 20 here, and the action folds to my button. Blessed again that the double straddle's on when I'm on the button. I look down at pocket 4s, I go ahead and raise it up to 50, and then new player in the big blind calls, although they've been playing a few hours now, then the straddle calls as well as the second straddle. So we go 4 ways to a flop of 7, 6, 4, let's go. We do flop a set again, like I wasn't running good enough this session. And then the big blind actually decides to lead out for 100. Both the other players fold, so the action's on me, and it's pretty interesting whether I want to call or raise here. I think this would be a good spot to defend my calling range with a strong hand. Like I said, definitely want to have some strong hands when I call here, being that I'm going to float a lot with hands like ace king and ace queen with backdoors, stuff like that. So if I'm going to flat with those hands a lot, should be flatting with some stronger hands, like I said as well. Having said that, could be dicey if the opponent is leading out because they have an overpair to this board. They're going to get scared off on a lot of turns, and it could be good just to build a pot now. So really could go either way. In the session, I decided to just call here. We get to see a turn, which is the 9 of clubs. The big blind keeps betting at it. They go ahead and make it 225. Pretty interesting spot yet again, because I actually think the opponent's pretty polarized here. Hands like pocket 8s and 7x probably would slow down on this turn, and probably I'm calling a check raise anyway. So it becomes a bit more of a polarized spot where they could have a hand like 7-6 or a flop straight or a bigger set than us, in which case maybe raising's too thin at this point, which is kind of crazy since I was like trapping on the flop. I decided to call here, and I think I like this play actually, just because it is good to play it cautious when the opponent actually does have a lot of stronger hands in their range now and will likely fold a lot of the worse hands that they continue to bet with. So I throw in the call here, and then we get to see the river, and the river, it's the 4 of clubs. No, I'm not joking. I don't even know if I'm surprised at this point. I've been running very good this session, and I river quads here. Let's freaking go. And then the opponent is in the tank for probably a good 20 to 30 seconds or so before announcing all in. Yeah, I'm running good this second. I literally throw all my chips in and turn over my quad straight away. The opponent was kind enough to show us they did have pocket jacks. So this is how good I run. I decided to not raise on the flop or the turn, which might have scared jacks off, and I get a run out where jacks is still an overpair on this board. So yeah, I'm absolutely blessed in this run out, and I stack someone for the upteeth time this session. I don't know what to say. This is just crazy. Hallelujah. Those were all of the interesting hold'em hands we played this session. We decided to wrap things up with a few PLO double board bomb pots. I V-pipped maybe 3 times and ended up chopping 3 times, which is usually the case with these PLO bomb pots. If you came to this vlog for a hot take, I don't actually like PLO bomb pots because this just happens all the time and it's a waste of time. But before I alienate half of my audience, I really did like my play during the course of the No Limit hold'em hands this session. I think I made use of not only being aggressive to try and win the small blind bounty, but also playing off the dynamics that were a more aggressive game and adjusting well to it, at least in my opinion. Of course, I did run really good this session, getting it all in and holding a few times, but I think even with those hands aside, I did like a lot of my decisions despite a few bet sizing mistakes and maybe a little bit of passive play towards the end of the session as well. So for today's gameplay grade, I'm going to go for it and give myself an A grade. And as you can probably tell at this point, I did run really good this session and ended up winning 5,600. So I'm still moving in the right direction to get myself out of this hole, but I'm still not there yet. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel to see what happened in the next video and if I was able to eventually get out of this hole at all. But for now, I'm out of here. Peace.